This week on Power and Politics.
I'm 35 years old. Doesn't mean that it's goodbye forever.
Less than 4 months after he was expelled from Congress, George Santos is back and running for office again. The former congressman is here today to explain why he's running and if he thinks he can win. Plus, primary election season is upon us, but is it a fair and democratic system? Why one group says closed party primaries do a disservice to voters. Power and Politics begins right now. Welcome to this week's edition of News 12's Power and Politics. I'm Rich Barrabi. George Santos is running for Congress again. Booted from office just 4 months ago and facing a trial in federal court some 6 months from now, the indicted and expelled Santos says he wants to represent Long Islanders once again. He made the announcement on X during the State of the Union address while he was in attendance on the House floor. He maintains access as a former member of Congress. Santos was seen talking with former allies in the House like Congressman Matt Gaetz, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, not his fellow Republican Nick LaLota. LaLota was instrumental in pushing for Santos's ouster, and now Santos says he is going to challenge LaLota in a 1st District Republican primary. Remember, he used to represent the 3rd District. In response to the news, Congressman LaLota tweeted, quote, "To raise the standard in Congress and to hold a pathological liar who stole an election accountable, I led the charge to expel George Santos. If finishing the job requires beating him in a primary, count me in." Joining us right now is former Congressman George Santos, who was going to be here in person. He's a bit under the weather. George, we hope you're feeling a little bit better. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Rich, and appreciate you guys accommodating me. But, it's bug season, and I'm not immune to them.
It is. That is for sure. So everybody's watching the State of the Union. The tweet comes across. You're running for Congress. I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, really? So I'm going to ask the question just like that. Is this real, George? Are you really running? And if so, why?
Well, look, just as you pointed out in your opening monologue, is it real? Yes, it's real, but can I get on the ballot is the bigger question. It is a very undemocratic process in New York where it has these petition signatures where you have to collect 1,250 minimum, but then if you show up with just 1,250, you're definitely not getting on the ballot because you're going to be challenged and sued, and they make it into almost lawfare to avoid people from getting on the ballot. But yes, I'm running to get on the ballot here in NY1. Look, since Nick LaLota won't move to New York 1, I will. I have a better voting record. I'm far more conservative than Nick LaLota, and quite frankly, I don't have accolades from Steve Israel saying that I was instrumental in putting words to paper for Obamacare. So I think it's very simple when you're comparing records. I have 11 months to compare up to Nick, and quite frankly, I'm very proud of my 11 months of conservative voting record in the House of Representatives, and I think NY1 deserves somebody with that type of record.
Well, George, why do you want to do this, and what is your message to voters who are aware of all of the history? They know you've been expelled. They know you're facing 23 federal charges. Why should they set that aside and say, yes, I'll vote for Santos?
Well, look, I'll put it this way to you, Rich. It's a matter of transparency, right? I think if I run a campaign of pure and honest transparency, it's the only way that I'm going to be able to gain the voters' trust back. Obviously, I'm going through the process with the DOJ. That is the process. I can't change that. But I stand convicted with my own convictions that I will prevail, right? I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't. So secondly, as far as why I'm running for office, I think it's very simple. I think we need more people who actually do what they're going to say when it comes to their agenda. Nick LaLota campaigned as a Trump Republican and then completely turned around and started voting for a bunch of crazy runaway spending bills in the House of Representatives, something that I said I wouldn't do and I didn't do. I think that the future of Long Island rests on 3 major pillars. 1 is inflation, 2 is border security, and 3 right now is really just trying to attain some level of fiscal responsibility so that we can continue to have future generations of Long Islanders be able to afford to stay on Long Island. That's the chief complaint I hear from parents. It's like, oh, my kids, they can't afford to buy a house here. I got to go, 2 hours away driving to go visit my grandkids, or I got to buy my kids a house. That has to stop. We have a disconnect here with what's going on in D.C. and how it affects our life here on Long Island.
Okay, we'll get to more about Congressman LaLota in just a bit, but in November, the day before you were expelled, here's what you said about why you were not running for re-election even then.
I'm not running for re-election because I chose not to put myself, my family through this process. Because here's the reality when it comes down. You're a local Long Islander. You know how this works. I would have an uphill battle against the press. I would have an uphill battle against the party. And it's just, you know what, there's a point in time where you just say, you know, enough is enough. I'm 35 years old, Rich. It doesn't mean that it's goodbye forever.
The record's pretty clear. I disliked him probably about 60 or 90 days before his fraud was known by the entire country. But Rich has a question, too.
Well, he said he's always hated you, by the way. He told us that yesterday. But
that record's probably more accurate.
But let me start with the first soundbite we heard there from you directly. You said it was about family. Were you being truthful then about your motives? Because I've got to think this is still going to put your family through the ringer, George. I mean, you know how this goes.
Absolutely. So, Rich, here's the deal. That was true at that point in time. At that point in time, that was very true. Things progress. I felt, and I obviously didn't do this without the consultation of my family and having a very long and hard conversation. And they gave me the go ahead. If they felt I thought it was right, they were here for it through thick and thin. I won't do pretty much anything if my husband doesn't tell me, all right, go for it. He usually is the person I need to be mindful of because he is the one who ends up being the frontline hitter for everything. He absorbs it all. But the reality is the process in which this all took place was so unfair. It was so un-American, and it evaded due process in a fashion where it's never happened before in history of Congress. So the reality is it was true at that point in time. But today it remains true. But I do believe that today it is a lot more attainable and a lot more palpable to continue in this mission.
All right, Congressman LaLota, you heard him there. It's well documented. You guys don't like each other. Everybody knows it. You've both been upfront about it. But when I'm looking at this, thinking you were representing the third, now you want to primary him in the first, is this about revenge for LaLota pushing for your expulsion in the House? And are you worried about hurting Republicans? This is a GOP incumbent.
Well, first of all, let's start with this. Did LaLota worry about lowering the margin in the House when he pushed to expel me? No, he didn't care. He hurt the GOP far more than anyone could ever hurt. Let's get that very straight. Second of all, let's not give him credit. The person to actually start leading the charge to push me out of Congress was Anthony D'Esposito in NY4. So LaLota's plagiarizing and taking credit over for someone else. That's number one. Number two, yes, I don't like LaLota. He's uncharismatic. He's arrogant. He's pompous. He's the rudest person and the most unpalpable person you can ever meet with reality in Congress. He thinks this is owed to him. Like this is some kind of like, oh, I'm entitled to this because I went to the Navy. The reality is two very simple things. He doesn't legislate well. Long Islanders at NY1 want a representative that lives there. I'm willing to make the move there. If I get on the ballot April 4th, by the end of April, I am a resident full-time of NY1. Nick LaLota has been representing it for 2 years, and he still resides in Amityville in Andrew Garbarino's district. So It's time for him to either put up or shut up. And if I'm bringing a little heat to the kitchen, forgive me for making it a little too hot. But if you don't want to get burned, get the hell out of the kitchen.
All right, lastly, George, I want to ask you about this. You've got the federal trial coming up. I understand you're in plea talks. There's a possibility that this trial is going to line up right before the election. Let's say you win a primary against Nick LaLota. How do you handle that? How do you convince voters to say, yes, there are these federal charges. I could be convicted. I might even plead to a crime, but at the same time, vote for me?
Well, look, let's just put it this way. It's the same question you have to ask the voters who are voting for President Trump, right? We're living in very different times and where we have unprecedented measures being taken against elected officials. Now, I'm not here to discredit them or to try to rebuke or talk ill about the DOJ and the FBI. That's not my intention. My intention is simple. I'm going through a process. I believe in the process. I wouldn't jump in the race if I wasn't confident. And the reality is I'm pushing forward. And look, it's about transparency, and I'm making this campaign the most transparent campaign in American history. That is my absolute goal. Everybody is welcome to have the most transparent access at all times to the campaign. So that's my message. If you want higher inflation, if you want an unattainable and unaffordable cost of living, please vote for Nick LaLota. If you want somebody who actually fights against the establishment in the swamp in D.C., please vote for me, because there's one stark comparison between LaLota and I. I don't do the D.C. lobbyist circuit like he does.
All right, George Santos, we will leave it there. And Congressman Nick LaLota will be on this show in the coming weeks, as well as we do want to hear from all the voices in this race. George Santos, thank you so much. We'll be right back.
Thank you.